Welcome to Geekstorians, the show where we rewind the reels of geek culture and find out how we ended up binge-watching the universe. I'm Dave from Geektown, and today we're heading back to a time where television grew teeth and heart and just enough self-awareness to change everything. This is the golden age of geek TV. It's Friday night, 1998. A family is arguing over who gets the living room television. You're cross-legged on the carpet, one finger hovering over the record button on a chunky silver VCR. The episode begins. You hit record a second too late, missing the first few notes of the theme tune. It's fine, you'll catch it next week, probably. Behind you, somebody shouts, "Don't tape over my Buffy!" It's not a plea, it's a battle cry. These cassettes are like sacred relics, proof that you were there when vampires and a snarky teen first walked across the screen. Before streaming queues and digital backups, fandom was a fight against entropy. Tapes stretched, labels peeled, and if you wanted to revisit your favourite episode, you prayed the tape hadn't been repurposed by your mum for Coronation Street. No. Each story felt precious because it could vanish. There was no next episode button, just the long, aching week until the credits rolled again. That waiting, that delicious agony of anticipation, was the heartbeat of fandom. And somewhere in those fuzzy, half-recorded broadcasts, television itself started to remember. Stories were linking arms across weeks, characters were learning and changing and bleeding. It didn't have a name yet, but the shape of modern TV was forming in the static and the tape hiss. To see how that happened, we need to rewind a little further. Back to a time when TV forgot everything on purpose. Before television discovered continuity, it suffered from a severe case of short-term memory loss. Every week, heroes forgot the trauma, villains escaped consequences, and the emotional growth was neatly vacuumed up before the end credits. But this wasn't artistic cowardice, it was economics. In the age of syndication, every episode had to stand alone, ready to be dropped into any Tuesday slot from Toledo to Torquay. Continuity was bad for resale value. If viewers needed a previously on, you'd already lost them. So each series lived in a cheerful little time loop. Columbo solved another murder committed by yet another smug millionaire, never noticing he was trapped in an infinite loop of polite homicide. The $6 million man could crash, rebuild, and crash again without ever needing therapy. And the A-Team escaped the military every week, only to end up right back in the same van solving a new problem the next week. But then Hill Street Blues hit NBC in 1981 and quietly started to rewire what television could do. It looked like another police procedural, but inside the noise and fluorescent lighting was something new. Overlapping storylines, messy personal lives, consequences that carried from week to week. The crimes reset each episode, but the people didn't. Suddenly network drama had a memory, and audiences discovered that they quite liked it. You couldn't half-watch Hill Street Blues while making the tea. For the first time, viewers were expected to keep up, to care, to remember. And they did. Fans began keeping unofficial logs, typed lists of episode orders, continuity notes, and the occasional conspiracy theory. The first glimmers of modern wikis were appearing in notebooks across suburbia, and the technology was quietly conspiring with them. The humble VHS recorder turned memory into hardware. Fans taped, catalogued, and rewound. Living rooms became miniature archives, their shelves a literal database of plot lines and adverts. A good collection could outlast a broadcast schedule, outwit a network executive, and survive at least 3 family relocations. For the first time, television was being treated like literature, stories to revisit, not consume and forget. Writers started noticing that devotion and smuggling continuity into the cracks, a two-part finale here, a returning villain there. Tiny rebellions disguised as format tweaks. Television was starting to keep notes. The only question now was, what might it do with them? Because once you start remembering, you start wondering. By the late 80s, television had started developing a memory of its own. In the US, Star Trek The Next Generation was quietly bending the rules. Episodes kind of still reset at the end, but you could feel continuity creeping in, character growth, callbacks, and even the occasional two-parter. It was like watching US network TV evolve a conscience one subplot at a time. And of course, we are talking mainly about US TV here. Because in the UK, Doctor Who had been experimenting with serial arcs for years. Entire stories played out over weeks with cliffhangers baked into the format long before streaming made it fashionable. Although here it wasn't done just for dramatic effect, it was to do with cost as well. Budget limits meant that you had to have rather more talking than lasers and flashy set pieces. But that also meant that you cared more about what happened next. Continuity wasn't so much prestige as it was survival, and fans, of course, loved it. And maybe it's no surprise that British audiences were already very comfortable with long-form storytelling. The nation was practically raised on continuity. Coronation Street, Crossroads, EastEnders, all of them taught viewers to track characters, grudges, and scandals week after week. If American TV was built on syndication, British TV was kind of built on soap. We didn't just tolerate ongoing storylines, we really demanded them. Back over in the US, in 1990, Twin Peaks hit the air and changed what American television thought it could get away with. It looked like a crime drama, until it wasn't. Continuity became mystery. Every episode peeled back another layer of the same dream. Who Killed Laura Palmer wasn't just a plot point, it was a national obsession. For the first time, millions of viewers were tracking clues, theories, and secret symbols like detectives. The audience wasn't just following the story, it was solving it. And then came X-Files. In 1993, television found its paranoia and discovered that mystery could be a business model. Each week, agents Mulder and Scully chased something impossible: aliens, mutants, monsters, and metaphors for institutional mistrust. But beneath the monster of the week was a growing conspiracy that was threading the episodes together like cigarette smoke. That mythology became television's greatest puzzle box. Fans met in late-night chat rooms and early forums to catalogue every clue, every abduction, every sighting of the smoking man. They built timelines, wrote essays, and argued about which episodes counted. The X-Files turned casual viewing into detective work. Every cutaway, every line of dialogue might be a key or a trick. Audiences were being trained to see patterns, to chase meaning, and to keep receipts. Online fandom was shaping in the background, forums, email chains, bulletin boards buzzing with speculation. No studio marketing team could have built that kind of loyalty on purpose. It was chaos that looked a lot like devotion. Television had never been this interactive, even if it was only pretending to listen. But mythology is a hungry beast. The deeper the X-Files dug, the harder it became to climb out. Plots folded in on themselves, answers bred more questions. It proved that you could hook an audience for years, but also that without a map, even the best conspiracy could lose its way. So while the X-Files was getting lost in its own labyrinth, another writer was quietly drawing one on purpose, a grand design that would give television something it had never truly had before. A beginning, a middle, and an end. While the X-Files was tangling itself in conspiracy, one writer decided to map his out. J. Michael Straczynski, or JMS for fans and anyone who couldn't spell his surname twice. He believed television could do something no one had ever let it do before: tell a single continuous story planned from start to finish. His answer was Babylon 5. A space station drama plotted like a novel. 5 years, beginning to end, written in advance. Not let's see where the season goes. a blueprint. The networks thought he was mad. Television doesn't work like that, they said. What if you get cancelled halfway through? JMS shrugged, then the story ends halfway. It was either lunacy or faith, depending on which side of the pitch meeting you're on.
Wow. Are you nuts?
When Babylon 5 finally launched in 1994, it looked unlike anything else, partly because it couldn't afford to. Instead of motion-controlled models and miniatures that were being used in things like Star Trek, it used Amiga computers running Lightwave 3D, essentially a beefed-up version of the same machines you might have played Lemmings on in your youth. The results weren't always that pretty, but they were historic. It was one of the first shows to build its world almost entirely inside a computer. And the writing matched the tech. Every episode was a tile in a larger mosaic. Wars, prophecies, betrayals, all plotted years ahead. Characters grew, failed, and remembered. Some actors did leave, but their departures were woven into the story rather than just erased or returning with a new face. For the first time, television was behaving like literature. But Straczynski's experiment wasn't confined to the TV screen. It was also how he talked to the audience. While most showrunners hid behind press junkets, JMS logged into Usenet. For those of you under 30, pre-web discussion forums, basically Reddit's older, snarkier cousin. Here he debated fans and answered questions and occasionally spoiled his own plot twists by accident. It was chaotic and utterly new. The first direct feedback loop between a TV creator and the community. In the end, the experiment worked. Babylon 5 told its 5-year story from beginning to end, a rare, complete arc in an industry built on reruns and reboots. It proved television could plan ahead, remember its own history, and trust the audience to keep up. And once television had learned to plan, it was ready to feel, because the next revolution wouldn't come from outer space, but from a high school library in California. Some revolutions arrive with a manifesto. Others show up in a miniskirt and a pointy bit of wood. When Buffy the Vampire Slayer premiered in 1997, nobody expected it to change television, especially not a show born from the ashes of a failed B-movie. Its creator, Joss Whedon, had written Buffy first as a feature film in 1992, only to watch Hollywood turn his darkly funny coming-of-age horror into a campy teen spoof. The film flopped, the idea died, but 5 years later, the WB network gave it a second life, on the smallest of budgets and the strangest premise. A teenage girl hunts vampires between algebra and heartbreak. It sounded ridiculous, until you saw it. Whedon pitched it as High School as a horror movie. The monsters were metaphors, demons for depression, possession for peer pressure, apocalypse for finals week. Each episode balanced quip with trauma, treating adolescence as a mythic quest told through eyeliner, blood, and perfect comic timing. Buffy didn't just have arcs, it had consequences. One week it broke your heart, the next it rewrote television's rulebook. When critics said the show's secret weapon was its snappy dialogue, Whedon answered them with Hush, 40 minutes of near total silence that turned the clever teen drama into a gothic fairy tale about communication and fear. When musicals were mainly reserved for dream sequences, Buffy gave us Once More with Feeling, a full-blown musical that wasn't filler at all, but a turning point forcing characters to sing truths they'd been hiding. And then there's The Body, an hour of grief so raw it stripped away music, fantasy, and even comfort, reminding viewers that death isn't always metaphorical. And then there's the opening of Season 5. At the very end of a fun episode written by Marty Noxon, where Buffy meets Dracula, comes one of the boldest rug pulls in TV history. As Buffy heads to the door to see a movie with her boyfriend, her mum calls out, "Buffy, if you're going out, why don't you take your sister?" To which they both object, shouting, "Mum!" No explanation, no wink to camera, just a brand new sister, out of nowhere in the final 22 seconds of the episode. A collective, "Wait, what?" echoed across living rooms. It was one of the greatest jaw-dropping, what the f*** moments in serial television. And you had to stew on it for a week, back when next episode meant next Tuesday. These weren't gimmicks, they were experiments in how far you could stretch the form without snapping it. Every risk pushed the story and the audience somewhere new. Behind the scenes on the show, Whedon had built a writer's room that would quietly seed modern television. Marty Noxon, Jana Spencer, David Greenwald, Drew Goddard, David Fury, Doug Petrie, Stephen Estonite. A lineup that reads now like a syllabus for the next 20 years of genre TV. From Daredevil to Battlestar Galactica, Foundation to The Good Place, Spartacus, Lost, and High Potential. Their fingerprints are everywhere. They carried Buffy's DNA with them. Wit, heart, and the courage to take emotion seriously inside fantastical worlds. And for fans, Buffy became a blueprint for emotional fandom. Before Twitter and Discord, there was The Bronze, an online forum where viewers dissected every line, wrote fanfiction, and occasionally found that one of the show's writers had just wandered into a post. It was messy and heartfelt, but weirdly wholesome, the early web at its best. But in hindsight, the sunshine came with shadows. Years later, cast and crew began to talk about what had really happened behind the cameras. Stories of bullying, fear, a culture that mistook cruelty for creative brilliance. It forced fans to ask an impossible question. Can you separate the art from the artist? How much of Buffy's soul still belonged to its creator, and how much had gone beyond that and already become the work of everyone else who built it, the writers, the cast, the fans who kept it alive long after he left? For many, it was like discovering that the hero's journey they'd loved was shot through with something darker, the same abuse of power the show itself had warned against. But maybe that's what made Buffy endure, because its lessons, resilience, found family, the strength to fight back, still stood even when the author fell short. The legacy of Buffy isn't moral perfection, it's survival. The next generation of showrunners, many of them forged in that writer's room, took the best of what the show taught and left the rest behind. They carried forward its wit, its heart, and its conviction that stories about monsters should never excuse real ones. Buffy proved that monsters could make you cry and heroes could make you laugh at your own pain. It showed that television could feel deeply, and that sometimes, even when the people behind it failed, the story could still save you. Once TV learned that kind of honesty, there was no going back. By the end of the 90s, geek television had grown up, not by accident, but because cable finally gave it room to breathe. Freed from network schedules and censorship notes, genre shows could stretch their legs, build worlds, and trust viewers to remember more than a week at a time. Angel took Buffy's heart and gave it a hangover, sprawling arcs, moral muck, and characters haunted by their own continuity. And Stargate SG-1 built an empire out of wormholes and teamwork. What began as a spin-off from a mid-90s action film became one of television's longest-running space operas. 10 seasons of mythology, diplomacy, and recurring jokes about bad Canadian weather. It proved you could mix serialized stories with standalone adventures and keep both hardcore fans and casual viewers happy. Continuity wasn't a barrier, it was glue. Meanwhile, cable itself was evolving. The Sci-Fi Channel, before it rebranded to Sci-Fi, became a playground for ambitious storytellers. On the prestige side, HBO was teaching everyone that long-form television could rival cinema. When Carnival arrived in 2003, half mythology, half Dust Bowl fever dream, it looked like Greek storytelling through the lens of Steinbeck. Continuity had gone literary. And here in the UK, Doctor Who was regenerating, literally and creatively. When Russell T Davies bought it back in 2005, he fused that British serial instinct with the emotional architecture of Buffy. Suddenly, Geek TV wasn't cult anymore. It was prime time, complete with Christmas specials and nationwide sobbing. And Davies had said that he took direct inspiration from Buffy's blend of humour, horror, and consequence. Proof that the dialogue between the US and the UK storytelling had come full circle. Geek television had learned to be sincere, cinematic, and unapologetically ambitious. The worlds were still weird, but the writing had weight. This was the age where fandom stopped being a fringe and became more of a foundation. And as cable was rewriting the rules, the networks began to panic, wondering how to turn continuity into rating strategy. Their answer? Make Geek TV the event of the week. By the early 2000s, the US networks wanted what cable had: loyal audiences, critical respect, and water cooler obsession. But to get it, they had to break their own rules. Continuity, once the enemy of syndication, was suddenly the secret sauce. They just had to learn how to use it without choking on it. 24 tried the most literal version imaginable: real-time storytelling. One season, one day, 24 hours of split-screen panic. It was serialized television as an adrenaline shot, each episode bleeding into the next, no time to breathe and no time to recap. It trained viewers to binge before that word even really existed. And then came Lost in 2004, the full myth arc blockbuster. A plane crash, a mysterious island, flashbacks, flash forwards, flash sideways, a few polar bears thrown in there. It wasn't television, it was a conspiracy theory with a time slot. For 6 years, millions of viewers combed through clues, freeze-framed polar bears, and posted diagrams of bunkers like cartographers of purgatory. It was proof that geek storytelling had conquered primetime, and that mystery could be monetized. But networks still didn't know how to nurture the kind of storytelling they were borrowing. In 2002, Fox greenlit Firefly, a space western from Buffy's own Joss Whedon. It had wit, it had character depth, and a long-term arc that promised to unfold over seasons. So naturally, the network aired the episodes out of order, yanked it mid-season, and then cancelled it before Christmas. It became a textbook case of how to mishandle a masterpiece, and a reminder that old broadcasting habits die hard. But fans campaigned, wrote letters, and eventually willed a film sequel into existence. Even in failure, Firefly had proved something important. Serialized Geek TV had an audience powerful enough to fight back. Battlestar Galactica arrived soon after and did what Firefly never got the chance to do: finish the sentence. It fused politics, faith, and trauma into science fiction, giving serialized storytelling moral gravity. And then came Heroes, the moment network TV tried to turn comic book logic into primetime gospel. Its first season was electric. Tight arcs, interlocking destinies, and the most quoted tagline of the decade: save the cheerleader, save the world. But the following years showed how fragile, unplanned serialization could be. Without a clear map, the story collapsed under its own mythology. A little bit of JMS's 5-year discipline might have saved a lot of rewrites. And then there was Fringe. On paper, it looked like X-Files 2.0, FBI agents, monsters, and some pseudoscience. In practice, it was something much braver and much weirder. Each of its 5 seasons took a hard left turn. Shapeshifters, parallel worlds, observer wars, time travel, even a flash-forward dystopia. It was planned as a 5-year arc from the start, and somehow hit every lunatic target. Fringe introduced multiverses before they were cool, mixing wild science with a beating heart. Beneath all the quantum nonsense, there was a story about forgiveness, a father, a son, and the white tulip he hoped to see as a sign of grace. And it very nearly didn't make it. Low ratings and studio nerves haunted the show from its second season onwards, but the fanbase and the writers refused to give up. Each renewal felt like a small miracle, a collective act of faith that somehow carried it to its planned ending. In a decade of cancelled promises, Fringe became the rarest thing on network television, a strange, ambitious story that got to finish. By the decade's end, serialized Geek TV had conquered primetime. Continuity was no longer a liability, it was the hook. But just as networks learned to master anticipation, technology was about to rewrite the schedule again. No more waiting a week, no more cliffhanger Thursdays. By the mid-2000s, the waiting game was starting to crack. DVD box sets and digital recorders meant you didn't have to plan your life around a broadcast. And then came Netflix, the company that looked at 40 years of scheduling and said, what if we just dropped it all at once? It felt revolutionary at the time. Seasons arrived like care packages from another dimension, 12 episodes at once with every next episode button begging to be pressed. Television stopped pacing itself and started sprinting. But the blueprints for this new world had been drawn years earlier. Babylon 5's grand architecture, X-Files conspiracies, Buffy's emotional arcs. They trained audiences to think long-form. And then came Lost, Battlestar Galactica, followed by things like Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, still weekly but built like novels. They were the bridge generation, the proof that viewers could handle complexity, that we'd stay loyal for years if the story earned it. So streaming didn't invent serialization, but it did industrialize it. For a while, the binge looked unstoppable, and geek storytelling thrived in this new world. Daredevil kicked down the door for Marvel's street-level universe. Stranger Things turned nostalgia into event television, a mixtape of Spielberg, Stephen King and synthwave. The streaming box set became Geek TV's natural habitat. Entire universes, crossovers, spin-offs and cinematic budgets beamed straight to your sofa. Every platform wanted its own weekend obsession, the show that you devoured and discussed, and then kind of forgot about within a fortnight. And there was the problem. The online conversation exploded like an avalanche on release day, and then evaporated. Where old TV created weekly peaks and 8 weeks of suspense, the binge gave us 8 days of memes and then silence. But as more streamers joined the fray, the pendulum started to swing back a bit as they realised they'd broken their own hype cycle. Apple TV tested the waters first, a few episodes at launch and then a weekly drop to keep the conversation alive. Prime Video started mixing strategies, some seasons dropping in full, others doled out piece by piece. And then even Netflix, the champion of the binge, began splitting its biggest shows into 2 or 3 parts, multiple avalanches of interest instead of one. And it turns out that suspense is still good for business. The Mandalorian proved you could take a galaxy-sized franchise and make it intimate again. A gunslinger and his tiny green sidekick released one patient week at a time. And The Boys did what comics had always done best, to deliver its story in installments, giving each issue and each episode time to sink in before the next explosion. The technology had changed, but human nature didn't. We still crave that collective moment, the cliffhanger, the countdown, the shared gasp when the credits rolled and everybody texted, "Have you seen this yet?" The geeks didn't just inherit television, they re-engineered it. Every multiverse, every Easter egg, every sprawling mythology owes its shape to that golden age when we were still waiting a week for answers. Streaming may have perfected the delivery, but the blueprint and the patience came from fans with VHS decks and faith in the next episode. And maybe that's the lesson. Stories don't need to arrive all at once. Sometimes the space between them, the breath, the pause, the week of wondering, is where fandom really lives. Once television was something you tuned into, you planned for it, you waited, you missed it, and maybe never saw it again. Now it waits for us, queued up, persistent, whispering, "Next episode," before the credits have even rolled. The picture's perfect, the access infinite, but somewhere along the way we misplaced the pause. Still, the magic's there, the quiet moment when the lights dim, the title fades in and you feel the world stretch a little wider. Television didn't just evolve, it learned empathy. It learned structure from Babylon 5, mystery from the X-Files, heart from Buffy, rebellion from Firefly, and endurance from Fringe, which proved that conviction could outlast ratings. It learned that continuity isn't just a storytelling trick, it's a kind of trust, a promise between the creator and audience that says, "Stay with me, this will matter later." And maybe that's why Geek TV became the blueprint for everything, because it taught us how to live with cliffhangers. Not just in stories, but in life. I'm Dave from Geektown, and this has been Geekstorians. If you want the latest TV, film and gaming news, or more stories from the history of geek culture, the people, the tech and the beautiful chaos in between, you'll find them at geektown.co.uk and on our sister show Geektown Radio. Join us next time where we'll dive into another chapter from the archives of fandom.